I bought a house after 8 years of saving and told absolutely no one in my family. Then while I was working overseas, my security camera sent a motion alert. I opened the live feed and froze. A moving truck was backing into my driveway. My daughter stepped out with her husband, my grandchildren, and his parents. They began carrying furniture straight into my house. Then I heard my son-in-law say, "Master bedroom is upstairs. Bring our bed in there first." They thought I was thousands of miles away and knew nothing. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Then I called the police. If this story already has your heart pounding, welcome. I'm so grateful you're here with Dad Family Revenge today. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from, your country, your city? I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what's coming next. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and education. Any similarity to real places or names is coincidental, but everything this story teaches you is worth keeping. The notification came at 6 in the morning, Frankfurt time, when the city outside my hotel window was still gray and half asleep. I had been awake for an hour already, sitting at the small desk with a set of construction blueprints spread across the surface, a cup of coffee gone cold beside my elbow. 11 days into a project that was supposed to take 3 weeks. The kind of work I had done for 30 years, reviewing load-bearing specifications, checking material tolerances, making sure that what was built would actually hold. I was good at it. I was always good at things that required patience. The phone buzzed once, then twice. Motion detected, front driveway, Delano Street. I set down my pencil. I had installed 4 cameras at the house before I left for Germany. One at the front door, one covering the driveway, one at the back of the garage, one inside the living room angled toward the entryway. Not because I was afraid of anything specific. I traveled often for work and the house was new, 4 months new to be exact. I had purchased it in March, a 3-bedroom Craftsman on Delano Street in Eagle Rock, Los Angeles, after 8 years of saving, 8 years of overtime shifts and automated investment accounts, and driving the same Ford F-150 until the odometer passed 140,000 miles. Nobody in my family knew I owned it. Not my daughter Emily, not my 2 grandchildren, and certainly not Derek Lawson, Emily's husband of 9 years, who had a talent for turning other people's resources into his own opportunities. Only 2 people knew: my old friend Raymond and my attorney Claire Morgan, who had handled the closing paperwork in March. I had given Claire my old apartment address as the mailing address on the mortgage documents, because I had not yet updated everything. A small administrative detail I would come to think about quite a lot in the weeks that followed. I opened the camera app. A white Mayflower moving truck was backing slowly into my driveway. My chest tightened. I leaned forward in my chair, bringing the phone closer to my face. The truck was large, the kind used for full household moves, not storage runs. 2 men in gray uniforms climbed out of the cab and walked to the rear of the vehicle. I watched them lower the cargo door. Then the passenger door of an SUV parked along the curb swung open. Emily stepped out. My throat clenched so hard it hurt. I watched my daughter stand in front of my house, the house she did not know was mine, and look up at the roofline the way someone does when they are deciding if a place feels like home. She was wearing the blue jacket she had owned for years, the one with the fraying left cuff she never got around to replacing. Behind her, Noah climbed out, 9 years old and dragging a backpack by one strap. Then Lily, 6, jumping down from the running board and landing with both feet. Then Derek. Derek stepped onto my driveway like a man arriving somewhere he owned. He stretched his arms above his head, looked around the street, and said something to the moving crew that made one of them nod and head toward the back of the truck. A second sedan pulled up behind the SUV. Derek's parents, Robert and Brenda Lawson, stepped out. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I called Emily. The call rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice warm and recorded, "You've reached Emily, leave me a message." I ended the call and immediately dialed again. This time it rang twice before being declined. She declined my call. A new alert appeared on my screen. The living room camera had detected motion. I switched feeds. Derek was standing in the middle of my living room, the room where I had assembled a bookshelf by myself on a Saturday afternoon in April, where I had eaten my first meal in the house standing at the kitchen counter because I did not yet have a table. He was pointing toward the staircase. His voice came through the camera's audio, slightly compressed but clear enough. "Master bedroom is upstairs," he said. "Bring our bed in there first." The pain that moved through my chest in that moment was not anger. Anger would come later, measured and cold and useful. What I felt standing in a Frankfurt hotel room at 6 in the morning watching a man point at my staircase was something closer to grief, the particular grief of a person who prepared carefully for a thing and finds out the preparation was not enough. I set the phone on the desk. I picked it back up. Then I called Claire. Claire Morgan answered on the second ring. She had been my attorney for 6 years, handled 2 contract disputes, 1 insurance claim, and the closing paperwork on the Delano Street property back in March. In 6 years, I had never called her before 7 in the morning. She answered anyway, her voice alert, and even the way people sound when they have trained themselves not to be rattled by unexpected things. "Walter, what happened?" I told her. I kept it to the facts, the way she had taught me dates, names, what I was seeing on the camera feeds in real time. When I finished, there was a brief pause on the line. Not hesitation. Claire did not hesitate. It was the pause of someone organizing information quickly. "Before we do anything else," she said, "I need to ask you one question, and I need a straight answer. Have you ever said or written anything, a text, an email, a voicemail, a comment, at dinner, anything at all, that could reasonably be interpreted as giving Derek or Emily permission to move into that property?" My jaw tightened. Never. Not even something informal, something offhand. Claire. My voice came out harder than I intended. I never told anyone in my family that house existed until 30 seconds ago when I told you what's on my camera. "Good," she said. "That's exactly what I needed to hear. Don't call Derek. Don't call Emily back yet. Don't say a single word to anyone at that property. Document everything, screenshots, timestamps, all of it. I'm going to stay on the line with you. Call the police on your other phone or use your laptop if you have one." I pulled my laptop across the desk, with one hand phone pressed to my ear. On the camera feed, Derek was walking through my living room with the unhurried confidence of a man conducting a tour of his own property. He stopped at the hallway, looked left, looked right, then pointed toward the smaller bedroom near the garage. His voice came through the audio feed clear enough to make my stomach clench. "That room's for Walter," he said. "He lives alone. He doesn't need much space." Emily was standing near the front door, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her weight shifting from one foot to the other the way she did when something bothered her, but she had not yet found the words for it. "But Derek," she said, "that's the smallest room in the house." Derek turned and looked at her with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious. "It's still his house, Em. We're not kicking him out. He'll have his own space." He said it warmly, generously, like a man doing his father-in-law a favor. My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles ached. I zoomed in on the camera covering the side of the garage. A cardboard box sat against the wall, partially visible at the edge of the frame. I adjusted the angle. Written on the side in thick black marker and handwriting I recognized as Brenda Lawson's careful cursive mom and dad new bedroom. I took a screenshot. Then I checked the shipping label on the side of the box. The label showed a date 3 weeks before I had left for Germany. 3 weeks. Derek had arranged this before I ever boarded a plane. He had packed his parents' belongings, labeled them, scheduled a moving truck, and selected which room in my house each person would occupy, all while I was still in Los Angeles, still locking the front door every morning on my way to work. "Claire," I said. "I'm here. There's a box by the garage, labeled for his parents. The shipping date is 3 weeks before I left." A short breath on the line. "Screenshot it. All of it." On the feed, Derek pulled out his phone and made a call. 2 minutes later, a van with a locksmith's logo on the side pulled up to the curb. My chest dropped. Derek was calling a locksmith to change the locks on my house. Before I could say anything, my phone buzzed in my hand, an alert from the smart lock system I had installed on the front door. Unauthorized modification attempt detected. The system had registered the external access attempt and logged it automatically with a timestamp. "He just called a locksmith," I told Claire. There was a beat of quiet on her end, and then something that might in another context have been a small laugh. "Good," she said. "That's actually very good for us, Walter. An attempt to change the locks on a property you own without your authorization goes directly to intent. That gets added to the documentation." She paused. "Now, one more thing before you call the police." "What?" "That layout Derek is walking around in the bedroom assignments, the rooms he knows about. Has he ever been inside that house?" My throat tightened. I thought back through every day since March. The closing, the walkthrough with the real estate agent, the Saturday afternoons I spent assembling furniture alone, the evenings on the back porch watching the maple tree in the fading light. "No," I said. "Never. He's never set foot in that house." "Then how does he know the floor plan?" The question hit me somewhere behind the sternum. I did not have an answer. Not yet. "Find out," Claire said. "I'll be here." I dialed the LAPD non-emergency line. The dispatcher who answered had a steady, unhurried voice, the kind that came from years of hearing emergencies and learning to stay level inside all of them. "LAPD non-emergency. This is Officer Reyes. What can I help you with tonight?" "My name is Walter Hayes," I said. "I own a residential property at an address in Eagle Rock. I'm currently in Frankfurt, Germany on a work assignment. My security cameras are showing a moving truck and multiple individuals moving furniture into my home without my knowledge or permission." A brief pause. "Do you know the individuals on the property, sir?" My chest tightened again. "Yes. One of them is my daughter, her husband, their 2 children, and his parents." Another pause, shorter this time, more deliberate. "And you did not give them permission to enter or move into the property?" "I did not." "Do you have documentation establishing your ownership?" "I have the deed, a current mortgage statement with my name and the property address, and a homeowner's insurance policy. I can email all 3 to you right now." "Please do that," Officer Reyes said. "I'm going to send a unit to the address while we talk. Can you stay on the line?" "I can stay on the line as long as you need." Claire was still on my other phone, listening without speaking. The way a good attorney listens when something important is unfolding. I forwarded the property documents from my email to the address Officer Reyes gave me, then switched the camera feed to the driveway view. The moving crew was carrying a dresser up my front steps. Robert Lawson was holding the front door open for them, pointing toward the interior hallway, like a man who had lived there for years. My stomach turned so hard I had to set the phone down for a second and press my palm flat against the desk. I picked it back up. "Officer Reyes, I've sent the documents." "Received," she said after a moment. Mr. Hayes, I'm confirming you as the owner of record on this property. A unit is 4 minutes out. On the camera feed, Derek came out onto the front porch. He must have seen the patrol car turning onto Delano Street, because he straightened up, immediately smoothed the front of his shirt with both hands, and arranged his face into something relaxed and cooperative. He walked down the porch steps and extended his hand toward the officer approaching from the street, smiling the wide, easy smile of a man who believed he could talk his way out of anything. "Officer, hey, glad you're here," Derek said loud enough for the audio to pick up. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is a family situation. My father-in-law owns this property, and he asked us to move in while he's overseas for work. We're just doing what he asked." Officer Reyes, I could see her on the feed, now a compact woman in her late 30s with her shoulders squared and her notepad already out, did not return the handshake. She looked at it, then looked at Derek. "Do you have any documentation of that permission, sir? A text message, an email, a signed agreement?" Derek's smile did not waver. It was a verbal agreement. Family doesn't always put things in writing. "Do you have anything in writing at all?" "Not technically, no, but voicemail, a letter." Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It was understood between us. His daughter lives here, his grandchildren. He wanted the family together." Reyes wrote something on her notepad. "I'm going to need you to step to the side for a moment, sir." That was when my phone buzzed with Emily's name on the screen. My heart lurched into my throat. I switched lines, hands unsteady. "Dad." Her voice was thin and high the way it got when she was fighting to keep herself together. "Dad, why are there police here? What's happening?" "Emily." I kept my voice as level as I could manage, even though my chest felt like something was pulling it apart from the inside. "I need you to listen to me carefully. Why are you moving furniture into my house?" A sharp intake of breath on her end. "Because Derek said you agreed. He said you told him we could stay here while we figured things out." The words hit me somewhere behind the sternum. I gripped the edge of the desk with my free hand until the corner bit into my palm. "Emily." I made myself slow down, made myself say each word clearly. "I need you to think about this carefully before you answer. Did you ever hear me say that directly? Did I call you, text you, write to you, and tell you that you could move into this house?" The silence that followed was not empty. I could hear Emily breathing short, uneven breaths, the sound of someone whose chest has gone tight with something they are only beginning to understand. "Dad," she finally said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. "Dad, I never heard you say it. Derek told me you two had talked. He said you didn't want to bring it up yourself because you didn't want me to feel like a burden." Something moved through me then that was not anger and not grief, but some combination of both that I did not have a clean word for. I pressed my free hand against my sternum, feeling my own heartbeat hard and uneven against my palm. "Emily," I said quietly. "I never spoke to Derek about this house. Not once. I never gave him or anyone else permission to enter that property." A sound came through the phone, then small and broken, the sound of someone's breath catching before tears come. Emily's voice dropped to almost nothing. "Then how did he know the address?" On the camera feed, I watched Officer Reyes turn back toward Derek with her notepad raised. She said something I could not hear. Derek's easy smile finally slowly began to slip. Emily was still crying when I asked her the question. Not the loud, theatrical kind of crying that demands attention. The quiet kind, the kind that happens when something you believed completely turns out to have been built on air. I could hear it in the way she breathed, in the small catches between her words, in the way she kept trying to speak and stopping herself because her throat would not cooperate. "Emily," I said as gently as I could manage from 6,000 miles away, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully. Why did you have to move out of your place in Pasadena? What happened with your lease?" She steadied herself with a long breath. "The landlord didn't renew. Derek told me they sent a notice 2 months ago. He handled all the correspondence with them because I was dealing with Lily's school enrollment, and he said he'd take care of it." Something cold moved through my chest. "Who told you the landlord didn't renew?" "Derek did." A pause. "He showed me a letter." I set the phone against my shoulder and looked at Claire's name on the other screen. She had been listening to every word. I switched lines for 10 seconds. "Raymond," I said, "I need you to call Raymond Kowalski right now. He knows the property manager at the Pasadena complex where Emily and Derek have been renting. Tell him I need to know whether that lease was actually terminated by the landlord." "Already on it," Claire said. "Call you back in 10. I switched back to Emily. She had pulled herself together somewhat. Her breathing had evened out, though I could still hear the residue of tears in her voice, that raw, scraped quality that crying leaves behind. "Dad," she said, "Derek has been handling most of our housing stuff for the past year. I trusted him to manage it. I know you did." I kept my voice steady even though my jaw ached from holding it set. "Emily, has Derek ever shown you anything in writing from me? A text, an email, anything where I said you could move into a house I owned?" The pause this time was longer. "No," she said finally. "He said you were old-fashioned about that kind of thing, that you preferred to keep arrangements verbal within the family." Old-fashioned. The word landed in my stomach like a stone. I had been using the same email address for 19 years. I had sent Emily approximately 400 text messages in the past 2 years alone. I was many things, but I was not a man who kept important arrangements verbal. Before I could respond, Claire clicked back onto my line. "Walter, Raymond just reached the property manager." I pressed both phones to my ears, one on each side. "The landlord did not terminate that lease," Claire said. Her voice was careful and precise the way it got when she was delivering information that had legal weight. "According to the property manager, a termination notice was submitted approximately 6 weeks ago. It was submitted via email from an address the manager had on file for the unit. The notice carried both signatures, Derek's and Emily's." My stomach dropped somewhere below the floor of the hotel room. "Emily," I said, switching back to her line, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay with me. Raymond just spoke to your property manager in Pasadena. Your landlord did not refuse to renew your lease. Somebody submitted a termination notice 6 weeks ago. It had your signature on it." The sound Emily made was not quite a word. It was the sound of someone who has just stepped onto ground they believed was solid and felt it give way beneath them, a short, compressed exhale, almost a gasp, followed by a silence so charged it had texture. "My signature," she repeated. The words came out flat and strange, like she was testing them in her mouth. "Your signature," I said. "And Derek's." On the camera feed, I watched Emily turn away from the front porch where she had been standing. She walked to where Derek was talking to Officer Reyes near the moving truck. Her arms tight across her chest, her steps quick and deliberate. Even through the small camera lens from 6,000 miles away, I could see the set of her shoulders, the rigid forward-leaning posture of a woman who has finally found the question she should have asked months ago. "Derek." Her voice cut clean through the ambient noise of the street. "Did you cancel our lease?" Derek turned. Something moved across his face, fast, almost imperceptible there, and gone in less than a second. Then the easy expression returned. "Emily, this isn't the time. Did you sign a termination notice without telling me? We can talk about this later. Did you forge my signature on that document?" Derek's jaw tightened. He glanced at Officer Reyes, who had stopped writing and was watching the exchange with the focused attention of someone recalibrating their understanding of a situation. He lowered his voice. "Emily, you need to calm down. You're making a scene in front of the kids." Emily's hands balled into fists at her sides. Her whole body was shaking now. I could see it even through the camera, a fine tremor running through her shoulders and down her arms, the trembling of someone who is furious and heartbroken in equal measure, and does not yet know which one to let out first. That was when Robert Lawson stepped forward from the doorway. He was 65 years old, a retired man who had always struck me as decent, someone who had simply made the mistake of loving his son more than he questioned him. He looked at Derek with an expression I had not seen on his face before. Not anger. Something older and heavier than anger. "Derek," Robert said. "Did Walter actually agree to any of this?" Derek turned to his father. "Dad, I need you to stay out of this right now." Robert did not move. He did not raise his voice. He simply stood in the doorway of my house, looked at his son, and said, "You told me the paperwork was done. You told me Walter had arranged everything." Claire's voice came through my other phone, very quiet. "Walter, the camera audio at the house, it's still running." My throat tightened so hard it ached. "Every word," I said. "Time-stamped and archived." Derek turned to his father with the controlled patience of a man who had practiced managing inconvenient people for a very long time. "Dad," he said, his voice dropping to the register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable without actually being reasonable. "I need you to trust me on this. Walter and I had an understanding. It was handled." Robert Lawson did not move from the doorway. He was not a large man, medium height, a little soft around the middle the way retired men sometimes get, but he stood with the particular stillness of someone who had finally decided not to be moved. "You told me and your mother that Walter was relocating to Europe long-term," he said. "You told us he wanted Emily to have the house. You told us the paperwork was finished. It was, show me." Robert's voice did not rise, but something in it hardened. "Show me the paperwork, Derek." Derek opened his mouth, closed it. His jaw worked once like he was chewing on something he could not swallow. That was when Brenda Lawson came out through the front door. She was 62 years old, a small, carefully dressed woman who had always struck me as someone who believed the best about the people she loved, sometimes long past the point when the evidence stopped supporting it. She looked at her husband first, then at her son, reading the tension between them with the quick accuracy of a woman who had spent decades paying attention to what was not being said in her own house. "Derek," she said quietly. "What's happening?" Derek turned to her. For just a moment, less than a second, something moved behind his eyes that might have been panic. Then it was gone. "Nothing, Mom. This is just a misunderstanding. Walter got spooked by the cameras and called the police before we could explain. It's fine." Brenda looked at Officer Reyes, who was standing 8 feet away with her notepad open and her expression professionally neutral. She looked at the moving truck, still half full of furniture. She looked at Robert, who had not moved from the doorway and was not going to. "Derek," she said again, and this time her voice was different, stripped of its warmth, just the bare question underneath. "Did Walter actually agree to this?" Before Derek could answer, a voice came from the sidewalk. "Excuse me." Mrs. Carol Briggs was 72 years old, and had lived in the house directly next door to mine for 11 years. She had been the first neighbor to introduce herself when I moved in, showed up on my second day with a plate of snickerdoodles and a piece of paper with her phone number on it, said to call if I needed anything at all. She was small and white-haired and walked with a slight forward lean, and she had apparently been watching the entire situation from her kitchen window for the better part of an hour. She walked up the driveway with the purposeful stride of a woman who had earned the right to say whatever she pleased. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, addressing Officer Reyes directly and ignoring Derek entirely. "I live next door. I've been watching this since the truck arrived. I know the man who owns this house. His name is Walter Hayes. He is a quiet, responsible man, and I have never once heard him say he was moving away." She paused, looked at Derek with clear, steady eyes. "Where is Walter, young man?" Derek's smile came back thinner this time, stretched at the edges. "He relocated overseas permanently. We're family. We're taking over the property while he's gone." Taking over. The phrase reached me through the camera audio and hit somewhere beneath my ribs. Not staying temporarily, not helping out, taking over. As if my 8 years of saving, my 30 years of work, my 4 months of building something quietly and carefully for myself, had simply become available, a vacancy to be filled by whoever moved fastest. My hands were shaking again. I pressed them flat against the desk and breathed. Mrs. Briggs looked at Derek for a long moment. Then she turned back to Officer Reyes. "I'd like to give a statement," she said, "if that's appropriate." "It is," Reyes said. "Thank you, ma'am." Derek's smile collapsed entirely. Reyes turned back to the moving crew, then to Derek. "Sir, I need the moving team to stop bringing items into the property and begin returning what's already inside to the truck." Her voice was even and final, the voice of someone who was not making a request. "The owner of record has confirmed he did not authorize entry or occupancy. Under California Penal Code 602, the presence of individuals in a residential property without the owner's permission constitutes unauthorized entry. I need everyone to cooperate." Derek stepped forward. The cooperative smile was completely gone, now replaced by something harder underneath something that had always been there behind the charm. "You can't just remove us. We're family. We have a right, sir." Reyes's voice did not rise a single degree. "You do not have a legal right to occupy property you do not own without the documented permission of the owner. I've confirmed ownership through deed and mortgage records. You have not produced any documentation of permission. I need you to cooperate or this becomes a different kind of conversation." From somewhere behind, Derek Noah's voice came thin and frightened through the camera audio. Mom, what's happening? Why are the police making us leave?" Emily pushed past Derek without looking at him. Her face was wet. She had been crying since our phone call and had not stopped, but her jaw was set, and her eyes were dry enough to show how hard she was working to hold herself together for the children. She put her arm around Noah's shoulders and pulled him against her side. "It's okay, baby," she said, her voice tight and careful. "It's going to be okay." Noah pressed his face into her jacket. His small shoulders were shaking. Lily, 6 years old, and too young to understand most of what was happening, tugged at Emily's sleeve and asked if they were going home. Emily's face crumpled for just a second, 1 second no more, before she smoothed it back into something her children could stand to look at. "We're going to figure it out," she told Lily. "I promise." She walked both children toward the car, her arms still around Noah, her steps steady and deliberate. She did not look back at Derek once. It took the moving crew 40 minutes to put everything back. I watched it all through the camera feeds, the dresser coming back down the stairs, the boxes being stacked onto the truck bed, The sectional sofa that had made it as far as the living room being maneuvered back through the front door by two men who had the careful, neutral expressions of professionals who had learned not to ask questions about the situations they found themselves in. Derek stood near the truck with his arms crossed and his eyes on the ground. He was not helping. He was not speaking. The version of him that had walked up my driveway 4 hours ago, easy, confident, certain of his welcome, was entirely gone. Claire was still on the line. "While we're waiting," she said, "I've been in touch with Mayflower's dispatch office. I identified myself as legal counsel for the property owner and requested a copy of the work order they're currently executing." I leaned forward in my chair. "And they emailed it 11 minutes ago." I heard the soft click of Claire opening a document. "The contract is signed by Derek Lawson. The delivery address listed is your Delano Street property, not the Pasadena rental, not any other address. His, yours." She paused. "The contract was signed 16 days before you left for Germany. He put down a deposit using a credit card in his name." The air went out of my lungs. 16 days. While I was still in Los Angeles. While I was still driving past that house on my way to work. Still eating lunch at my desk. Still living the ordinary days that came before I knew any of this was coming. Derek had already signed a contract with a moving company to relocate his family into my home. "Claire," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "He planned this before I even left the country." "Yes," she said simply. "And that matters enormously. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a family member making an impulsive decision in a moment of desperation. This was premeditated. The contract establishes intent. The deposit establishes commitment. The delivery address establishes that he knew exactly where he was going." She let that sit for a moment. "Walter, I want to ask you something." "Go ahead." "You told me Derek has never been inside that house, not once." "That's correct." "Then how did he know which room was which? He walked your daughter through that house this morning, like he'd lived there for years. He assigned bedrooms. He knew about the room near the garage. He knew the master was upstairs." She paused. "I pulled the old listing for your property. The real estate agent who sold you the house left the listing active on Redfin and Zillow for several weeks after closing standard practice. Sometimes they forget to deactivate. The listing included 18 interior photographs and a full floor plan." I pressed my hand flat against my chest. Derek had never needed to set foot inside my house. He had studied it from his phone or his laptop room by room at whatever hour suited him with all the time in the world. He had downloaded the floor plan, measured the rooms, decided who would sleep where, and then drawn it out by hand in that gray box Emily would find in his closet 3 days later. "He did his homework," I said. "How very thoroughly," Claire said. "Which brings me to the shipping label on that cardboard box by the garage, the one marked for his parents. Can you zoom in on the label?" I switched to the garage camera and zoomed until the text resolved. "Packing date," I read. 3 weeks before I left. So he had his parents packing their belongings 3 weeks before you boarded a plane," Claire said. "He arranged a moving truck 16 days before you left. He studied your floor plan and assigned rooms. He submitted a fraudulent termination notice on Emily's lease. And then he waited for you to be 6,000 miles away before he moved." She let out a slow breath. "Walter, I want you to understand what you have here. You have a paper trail. A very clean one. On the feed, the last box went up the truck ramp. One of the moving crew pulled the cargo door down and latched it. Derek watched this happen with the expression of a man watching something he had built over a long time get taken apart in an afternoon. Brenda Lawson was sitting on the porch steps. She had been there for the last 20 minutes, not moving, not speaking to anyone. At some point, she had taken her phone out and set it face down on her knee. Her back was very straight, the way people sit when they are holding something in that would embarrass them to let out. When Robert came and sat beside her, she did not look at him. She pressed her lips together until they went white, and her hands gripped her own knees hard enough that I could see the tension in her knuckles even through the small camera lens. She had sold her sofa, her dresser. The 6-person dining set she and Robert had owned for 20 years, the one they used at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and every birthday dinner their grandchildren had ever had. She had sold all of it because her son told her she would not need it anymore, that she was moving somewhere better. The grief that moved through my chest in that moment was not for myself. "Claire," I said quietly, "one more thing." "Yes. You asked earlier how Derek knew my address in the first place. I've been thinking about it. I had been turning it over since the moment she asked, the pieces arranging themselves slowly into something that made terrible sense. I used my old apartment address as the mailing address on the mortgage documents. I hadn't updated everything yet. My property tax notice from the county would have gone there. A pause. "And who had access to your old apartment mailbox?" "Emily sometimes collected my mail when I was traveling. Derek drove her there." I stopped. Started again. "He would have been with her." Claire was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was measured and careful, the voice of someone who understood what they were about to say. "Walter, if Derek opened that envelope, if he accessed a piece of first-class mail addressed to you without your permission, that is a federal offense. 18 U.S.C. Section 1708, federal mail theft." She paused. "I need you to find out if that envelope still exists. Don't let anyone touch it." Outside on the street, the Mayflower truck engine turned over. The truck pulled slowly away from the curb, leaving my driveway empty for the first time since 6 in the morning. The house was mine again. But the question of how Derek had known it existed in the first place was suddenly much larger than I had thought. And somewhere in that question was an envelope I needed to find. We are halfway through this story, and what's coming next changed everything. Before I go any further, I need to know you're still with me. If you're listening right now, drop the number 7 in the comments. Just the number 7. That's all. It tells me you're here, and it means more than you know. Stay with me. The next part of this story is where the real picture starts to come together. Heads up, like all stories on this channel, some details here are fictional, shaped for storytelling purposes. If that's not your thing, no pressure at all. You can step away anytime. But if you're staying, I promise it's worth it. 3 days passed. I stayed in Frankfurt because the project required it. Load-bearing calculations do not pause for family emergencies, and I had people depending on my sign-off before steel could be ordered. I worked 14-hour days and checked the camera feeds every few hours and slept badly and ate whatever the hotel restaurant was still serving when I finally stopped working each night. Emily called on the second morning from the motel in Pasadena, where she and the children were staying. I could hear the difference in her voice immediately, the raw, scraped quality of someone who had not slept much either, who had been lying in a strange bed in a room with 2 children asking questions she did not yet know how to answer. "Dad," she said, "can I ask you some things?" "Anything," I said. She started slowly, carefully. "The way you approach something you are not sure you want to confirm. Noah's soccer program last year, the one at Huntington Park. Did you help pay for that?" I set down my coffee. "Yes. $420. I sent it to Derek's Venmo account in September, because he said the registration deadline was the next day, and he didn't have time to set up a bank transfer. A long breath on Emily's end. Derek told me he paid for that himself. He didn't. Another pause. I could hear her working to keep her breathing even, and I knew what that effort cost her because I had heard it before when her mother died. When she lost a job, she had loved the particular sound of Emily Hayes not letting herself come apart when she needed to stay functional. Lily's piano lessons, she said. This past spring, 8 weeks at the studio on Colorado Boulevard, $640, I said. Paid directly to the studio in March. I have the receipt in my email. Emily made a sound that was not quite a word. Something caught high in her throat, something that wanted to be a sob but got held back by sheer will. He told me you forgot, she said. He said you promised Lily you'd cover it, and then you forgot, and he had to scramble to pay for it himself. The anger that moved through me then was cold and specific. Not the hot, unfocused kind that makes you say things you regret. The kind that settles in the chest, like ballast, heavy, stabilizing, useful. I did not forget, I said. I have never forgotten anything I promised either of those children. I know, Dad. Her voice cracked on the second word, and she stopped. Swallowed. Started again. I'm starting to understand that now. She asked about Noah's birthday bicycle, the green 1/8 birthday, the one Noah had apparently never seen. I told her I had spent $380 on it at a sporting goods store in Glendale, that Derek had told me Noah was going through a phase where he only wanted things in blue, and that I had assumed they exchanged it. Emily told me Noah had never owned a green bicycle. Noah did not know the bicycle had ever existed. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it, not empty, but full of something neither of us was ready to name out loud yet. I could hear Emily's breath becoming shorter and more uneven, the quiet precursor to tears that she was fighting hard to hold back. Emily, I said gently. I'm here. 2 words, barely audible. How long has Derek been handling most of the financial correspondence between us? She thought about it. 3 years, maybe. He said it was easier. He said you and he had a good relationship, and that going through him simplified things. He said you preferred it. 3 years. For 3 years, Derek Lawson had stood between me and my daughter and managed what each of us heard from the other, what I knew about their needs, what she knew about my generosity, what the children knew about their grandfather. For 3 years, he had taken the money I sent and told Emily he earned it. Taken the gifts I bought and told the children they came from him or never arrived or were forgotten. I thought about every birthday card I had sent that Emily thanked me for a little too briefly. Every holiday where the conversation felt slightly off, slightly managed, like I was being given just enough to keep me from asking questions. Every time Emily said Derek had mentioned I seemed distant, lately seemed to be pulling back, seemed less interested in being involved. He had been editing me out of my own family's story for 3 years. My chest hurt with a physical ache, like something structural had shifted. Emily, I said. There's a gray box in Derek's closet at the motel. He may have brought it with him. He keeps financial records in it. I need you to look for it. A beat. How do you know about that box? Claire found records of some transactions I want to understand better. If the box is there, I need to know what's in it. I kept my voice steady, practical, the voice I used on job sites when I needed people to move without asking too many questions yet. Can you look? I heard her get up, the soft sound of a motel room. A closet door, the specific quiet of someone searching through someone else's belongings for the first time, and realizing that the act itself means something has already changed between them. Then Emily went very still, "Dad," she said. Her voice had dropped to almost nothing, the way voices go when the body has absorbed something too large for normal volume. "Dad, there's a lot of stuff in here." "What kind of stuff?" The sound of paper. The sound of Emily's breathing changing faster, now shallower, the sound of someone whose hands are starting to shake. "There's a copy of your property tax notice," she said. "There are photos of your house. There's a hand-drawn diagram." A pause. "Dad, someone drew out all the rooms." My hand tightened on the phone until my knuckles ached. "Emily," I said carefully. "Is there an envelope in there?" "A county envelope addressed to me at my old apartment." More rustling. A long pause. "Yes," she said. "It's been opened." The word landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. "Don't touch it again," I said immediately. "Put it down carefully, and don't let anyone else touch it. I'm going to call Claire right now." "Dad." Emily's voice was very small. "Who opened it?" I already knew the answer. I had known it on some level since Claire had first asked me about the mail 3 days ago. But knowing something and hearing it confirmed out loud are two different weights entirely. "I think you already know," I said quietly. On the other end of the line, Emily's composure finally gave way. I heard it happen, the long, shuddering breath that comes before tears, the small, broken sound of someone who has been holding too much for too long and has finally run out of the strength to keep holding it. She cried for a long time. I stayed on the line and let her. Emily called back an hour later. She had put the children to bed, Noah and Lily sharing one of the 2 motel beds, the television turned low to something familiar and comforting, the kind of background noise that tells children things are normal even when they are not. Her voice had changed again. The tears were gone, wrung out completely, and what was left was something quieter and more dangerous, the flat, focused calm of a person who has decided to look at something directly instead of away from it. "I went through the whole box," she said. "Tell me what's in it." She exhaled slowly. "A copy of your property tax notice. The county seal, your name, the Delano Street address. It's a photocopy, someone ran it through a printer or a scanner." A pause. "There are printed photographs of the house. Interior shots, the kitchen, the living room, the bedrooms, the garage. They look like they came from a real estate website." "Redfin," I said. "The listing was still active for a few weeks after I closed. The agent left the photos up." "There's a hand-drawn diagram," Emily continued. Her voice stayed level, but I could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. The way you can hear someone gripping the edge of something to keep from sliding. "It's on graph paper. Every room is labeled. The measurements are written in the margins." She stopped. "Dad, my bedroom is labeled. Our names are on it. Mine and Derek's." Another stop longer. "Your name is on the room by the garage." I pressed my palm flat against the desk and held it there. "What's the date on the diagram?" I asked, the sound of paper moving. "Bottom right corner, May 14th. May 14th. 6 weeks before I left for Germany." Derek had been sitting somewhere in his house at the kitchen table maybe, or in the office. He kept off the second bedroom, drawing a floor plan of a house he had never entered, labeling, assigning spaces, deciding where each person would sleep. Deciding where I would sleep. Writing my name in the smallest room in the house on the 14th of May and filing it away in a gray box in his closet. Something moved through my chest that was not anger and not grief, but something that lived in the territory between them, a cold, heavy pressure, like the moment before a structure fails, when everything that was holding it together is still technically in place, but you already know what's coming. "There's more," Emily said. Go ahead. Shook an email printout between Derek and a locksmith in Eagle Rock. Derek asked for a quote on rekeying a residential property. The locksmith responded with pricing. Derek confirmed the appointment. She paused. The date on Derek's confirmation email is 4 weeks before you left, but the appointment itself was scheduled for the day after your flight to Germany. He wasn't going to change the locks until you were already in the air. 4 weeks before I boarded a plane to Germany, Derek Lawson was scheduling a locksmith to change the locks on my house. Emily. I kept my voice very steady. At the bottom of the box. Is there an envelope, a manila or white envelope from Los Angeles County? More rustling. A long pause. Yes, she said. It's white. It has your name on it. Walter Hayes, and then the address of your old apartment on Garfield Avenue. Another pause, shorter. Dad, it's been opened, and then taped back shut. Really carefully, whoever did it used clear tape and lined it up exactly with the original fold. The air left my lungs in a slow, measured exhale. Someone had opened a piece of first-class mail addressed to me. Had read what was inside my property tax notice, the document that listed the Delano Street address. The document that told anyone who read it exactly where I owned property. Had resealed it carefully, precisely with the deliberate care of someone who wanted it to look untouched. And then had used that information to research a house, draw a floor plan schedule, a locksmith, hire a moving company, terminate a lease, and wait. Can Emily? I said. Don't touch that envelope again. Put it down right now, and don't let anyone else touch it either. Can you do that? Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Dad, who opened it? I had been turning that question over since the morning Reyes had asked me about the mail. Turning it over and setting it aside and coming back to it the way you circle something that you already know the answer to, but are not ready to say out loud. Trick Emily, I said carefully. When I traveled for work over the past year before I moved to Delano Street, you used to collect my mail from the Garfield Avenue apartment sometimes. Do you remember that? Yes. But honestly, most of the time, Derek would go in and grab it while I waited in the car. He said parking was easier that way, and he didn't mind making the trip. Something settled into place in my chest, cold and exact, like a key turning in a lock. Did he ever hand you a county envelope white with my name on it? Her breath caught. No, I don't think so. I would have remembered that. I know you would have, I said. I picked up my other phone and called Claire without ending Emily's call. Claire answered on the first ring. I told her about the envelope, the photocopy of the tax notice, the careful resealing, the clear tape aligned with the original fold, the date on the Redfin photos, the locksmith email, all of it. Claire listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. The Claire Morgan version of a sharp intake of breath. Walter, she said, and her voice had taken on the precise, careful quality it got when she was about to tell me something that had legal weight. Opening another person's first-class mail that is addressed specifically to a named individual, not to a residence or a current occupant, is a federal criminal offense. 18 U.S.C. Section 1708, Federal Mail Theft. The fact that the envelope was resealed afterward does not diminish the offense. It may actually compound it, because it establishes consciousness of guilt. Whoever did this knew it was wrong and took deliberate steps to conceal it. My throat tightened until it ached. What does that mean in practical terms? I asked. It means we now have a federal component to what was already a state-level trespassing case, Claire said. It means the envelope is evidence and needs to be handled accordingly. Emily should not touch it, should not move it, should photograph it in place before anything else happens. It means that the entire chain of events, the address being discovered, the Redfin research, the locksmith appointment, the moving company contract, the lease termination, all of it flows from that one opened envelope. She paused. Walter, I also need to tell you something else I found this morning. Tell me. I was running Derek's name through some legal inquiry databases, standard background work I do when I'm building a case file. 6 weeks before you left for Germany, Derek contacted an attorney here in Los Angeles. The inquiry was about adverse possession. The term landed somewhere in my chest, like a weight being set down. Explain that to me, I said. Chatikata. The attorney inquiry confirms what we already know about the adverse possession angle, Claire said. He tried the legal route first. It was closed. So he moved to direct action instead. She paused. Walter, he has been thinking about this house for a very long time, and now we have documentation that proves it. Send the letter, I said. I sat in my Frankfurt hotel room and looked at the blueprints still spread across the desk, the load calculations, the material tolerances, the careful documentation of what a structure could bear before it failed. I thought about a gray box in a motel closet in Pasadena, about graph paper and labeled rooms, and a name written in the smallest space in the house. Claire, I said, book me the earliest flight back to Los Angeles that you can find. The flight from Frankfurt to Los Angeles took 11 hours and 20 minutes. I spent the first 4 hours finishing the project documentation. I owed my team calculations, sign-offs, material specifications, because the work still needed doing, and because having something technical to focus on kept the other parts of my mind from running too far ahead of themselves. I spent the next 3 hours trying to sleep and managing perhaps 90 minutes of it, broken and shallow, full of half-formed images that dissolved before I could identify them. I spent the last 4 hours looking out the window at nothing and thinking about a gray box and a hand-drawn floor plan and a name written in the smallest room in the house. Raymond Kowalski was waiting at the arrivals level at LAX with a paper cup of coffee in each hand. He was 70 years old, built like a man who had spent 4 decades on job sites and had not entirely softened since retiring, with gray hair cut short, and the kind of steady, unhurried presence that makes other people calm down just by proximity. He had been my closest friend for 22 years. We had worked together on 17 projects, argued about baseball for 2 decades, and sat together in a hospital waiting room on the night Margaret died. He handed me one of the coffees without saying anything, which was exactly right. We walked to his truck. He waited until we were on the I-105 headed north before he spoke. "You look like you slept on a plane," he said. "I slept about 90 minutes on a plane." "Close enough." He changed lanes smoothly. Claire filled me in on most of it. "You want to hear what I've been finding out, or you want to drink your coffee first?" "Tell me while I drink the coffee." Raymond nodded. He drove the way he did, everything unhurried, methodical, getting where he was going without making a production of it. "I've been talking to people," he said. "People in your neighborhood on Delano Street. People who know Derek and Emily socially, the office manager at Derek's company. Trying to get a picture of what he's been telling people." He paused. "Walter, he's been running 3 completely different stories. Same situation, three different versions depending on who he's talking to." I held the coffee cup in both hands and said nothing. Outside the window, Los Angeles was assembling itself out of the morning haze. "With Emily," Raymond said, "he told her you two had a private conversation, that you came to him directly, man to man, because you didn't want Emily to feel like she was burdening you. He said you told him you wanted the family together in the house, that you were getting older and didn't want to be rattling around alone, but that you were too proud to ask Emily outright. He positioned himself as the one who made it happen. The one who understood you well enough to translate what you really meant. The coffee went bitter in my mouth. With his parents, Raymond continued. The story was different. He told Robert and Brenda that you'd accepted a long-term contract in Europe, 18 months minimum, maybe longer. That you didn't want the house sitting empty, that you'd arranged with him to have the family move in and take care of the property while you were gone. He made it sound like a practical arrangement, a favor you were asking of them. Raymond's voice stayed level, but I could hear something underneath it, the particular flatness of a man working hard, not to say what he actually thought. Brenda sold furniture, Walter. She sold her dining room table and 6 chairs because she thought she wouldn't need them. She thought she was moving into your house permanently. My chest tightened until breathing required conscious effort. And the neighbors? I asked. Raymond exhaled through his nose. That's the one that got me. He introduced himself to at least 3 of your neighbors on Delano Street before the moving truck even arrived. Told them you were relocating to Europe and that your daughter and her family would be taking over the property. He said you were at an age where you didn't need that much space and you wanted the family to have it. He glanced at me sidelong. Mrs. Briggs had a farewell card for you, Walter. She was going to put it in your mailbox. Something broke open quietly in the middle of my chest. Carol Briggs, who had brought me snickerdoodles on my second day in the house, who had told me about the maple tree and the tire swing and the family that used to take it down every fall, who had watched the whole terrible afternoon from her kitchen window and then marched over with the clear-eyed purpose of a woman who had decided to tell the truth. She had been ready to say goodbye to me. He started telling these stories 5 weeks before I left, I said. It was not a question. At least, Raymond said. Probably longer. You don't spin 3 separate narratives that clean without practice. He merged onto the I-110 north. Walter, here's what I keep coming back to. He did all of this without a single piece of paper. No text from you, no email, no voicemail, nothing in writing. He convinced 3 separate groups of people of 3 completely different things using nothing but his own words, and he timed it so you'd be 6,000 miles away when it fell apart. Raymond shook his head slowly. That's not a man who panicked. That's a man who thought it through. I looked out the window at the city passing by. Silver Lake Echo Park. The hills beginning to take shape in the morning light. He didn't need paper, I said. He built everything on the assumption that the people around him would stay quiet. Emily wouldn't call me directly to confirm. His parents wouldn't call me directly to confirm. The neighbors wouldn't call me directly to confirm. As long as nobody talked to me, the stories held. I turned the coffee cup in my hands. The only thing he didn't account for was the cameras. Raymond was quiet for a moment. And the fact that you called the police before he had time to establish residency. That too. We turned onto Delano Street at 9:30 in the morning. The house sat quiet in the early light, the maple tree visible over the roofline at the back, the porch steps wide and empty. My Ford was still in the garage where I had left it 3 weeks ago. The driveway was clean. I got out of the truck and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at it. Raymond came around and stood beside me. He did not say anything. He understood the way he always understood when words were the wrong instrument for a moment. I walked up to the front door, entered the new code I had already changed remotely from Frankfurt, and stepped inside. The house smelled like itself wood and paint, and the faint trace of coffee from the last morning I had spent here before Germany. Everything was where I had left it. The bookshelf I had assembled alone on a Saturday in April. The kitchen table I had bought second-hand, because it reminded me of the one Margaret and I had owned for years. The back windows through which the maple tree was visible in the morning light, its leaves catching the first real heat of the July day. I stood in the kitchen for a long time with my hand flat on the countertop. Then my phone buzzed. Derek's name on the screen. I looked at it, watched it ring, let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail. A third time. Then nothing. I put the phone face down on the counter and went to make coffee in my own kitchen for the first time in 3 weeks. And I did not think about Derek Lawson at all while I did it, because some things deserve your full attention and some things do not, and I have always known the difference. I woke up at 5:45 the next morning to the sound of the maple tree moving in the wind outside the back window. For a moment less than a second, the brief grace period between sleep and full consciousness, I did not remember any of it. There was just the sound of leaves and the early gray light coming through the curtains and the particular silence of a house that is yours alone. Then it all came back the way it does, and I lay still for a moment with my eyes open and let it settle. I got up, made coffee, and sat on the back porch steps with my phone. Derek's voicemail was 43 seconds long. I played it once, sitting in the early morning with the coffee going warm in my hands, and the maple tree casting its first thin shadows across the yard. Derek's voice was controlled, careful, measured, the voice of a man who had rehearsed what he wanted to say and was delivering it with the precision of someone who understood that tone mattered as much as content. "Walter," he said, "I think we both know this situation has gotten out of hand. Emily is struggling. The kids don't understand what's happening. They keep asking where home is, and I don't have an answer for them." A pause, calculated, I thought, designed to let that image settle. "I'm not asking for everything. I'm asking for a conversation. You have more space than you need. You know that. The kids need stability. Emily needs her family around her. I don't understand why you'd rather call the police than sit down and talk like adults. Call me back when you're ready to be reasonable." I listened to it once. Forwarded the audio file to Claire. Then I deleted the voicemail and set the phone face up on the porch step beside me. The morning was quiet, except for the tree and a dog barking somewhere 2 streets over and the sound of a car starting on Delano Street. I drank my coffee and watched a mockingbird work its way through approximately 6 different songs in the oak at the back of Mrs. Briggs's yard. It was a good morning to sit outside. I intended to sit outside in the mornings for a long time. The phone rang at 7:12. The name on the screen was one I had not seen in several years. Rachel Ortega. I knew who she was, Emily's closest friend from college. A woman I had met perhaps a dozen times at holiday dinners and birthday parties. Over the years, before the dinners and parties had slowly, gradually stopped, including me. I answered, "Mr. Hayes." Her voice was careful and a little tense, the voice of someone who had prepared what they wanted to say and was still not entirely sure they should say it. "I don't know if Emily told you I might call." "She didn't," I said. "But I'm glad you did." Rachel exhaled a short, relieved breath. "I've been trying to figure out whether to reach out for a long time. I didn't want to make things harder for Emily. But after everything that happened last week..." She stopped, started again. "I think you need to know some things." "Tell me," I said. She told me about the past 3 years, in the careful, organized way of someone who had been carrying information they did not know what to do with. Derek had not cut Emily off from her friends in any way that was visible or dramatic. There had been no ultimatums, no confrontations, no scenes. It had been quieter than that, the way water moves through stone not by force but by persistence and time. Rachel was not a good influence. Derek's phrase delivered to Emily with the patient concern of a husband who only wanted what was best. Another friend, a woman named Donna, didn't respect the boundaries of their marriage. Derek's assessment offered. After Donna had made an offhand comment, he had apparently decided to take as a criticism. A third friend had too much drama in her own life, and Emily didn't need that energy. Each reason was reasonable on its own. Each one delivered at the right moment in the right tone, had the ring of a man looking out for his wife. But the cumulative effect, Rachel said, her voice tightening as she spoke, was that Emily's world had contracted year by year until the people left inside it were Derek, the children, and the handful of family members Derek felt he could manage. "She called me the night before the moving truck showed up," Rachel said. "Did she tell you that?" My hand tightened around the coffee cup. "No. She called me around 11. She said something felt wrong, but she couldn't explain what. She said Derek had been distracted for weeks, secretive, she said, in a way she couldn't quite name. She wanted to talk it through." Rachel paused. "I told her she should call you. I said whatever was bothering her, you were the person to call." "What did she say?" Rachel's voice went flat with something that sounded like old, tired anger. "She said Derek had mentioned that you didn't really want to hear from them unless something was seriously wrong. That you'd told him you needed your space now that you were older. That you'd said family visits felt like a lot." She stopped. Those were his words. She believed them because he'd been saying versions of them for 2 years. The mockingbird and Mrs. Briggs's oak started up again. A cardinal's song this time, then a jay, then something I could not identify. I sat with the phone against my ear and let what Rachel had said arrange itself in my chest. For 14 months I had noticed the distance growing. Dinners that were canceled at the last minute. Holidays where Emily's calls were shorter and more careful, as if she were reading from a script. A birthday where Noah had seemed uncertain whether he was allowed to hug me, had looked at his father first before crossing the room, and Derek had given a small, permitting nod that I had told myself I was imagining. I had not been imagining it. I had thought Emily was choosing Derek over me. Emily had thought I was choosing distance over her. Derek had stood between us for 14 months, tending both stories, keeping both of us just uncertain enough about the other that neither of us picked up the phone and asked the direct question. The whole architecture of it, built out of nothing but managed information, and the assumption that the people around him would not compare notes, hit me somewhere behind the sternum with a force that made me press my free hand against my chest. "Rachel," I said. "Thank you for calling. I should have done it sooner." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, the guilt of someone who had waited too long coming through. I kept thinking it wasn't my place, that Emily would figure it out on her own. "She is figuring it out," I said. "She's been figuring it out since last week." A small silence, the comfortable kind, the kind between people who have just said something true and do not need to add to it. "Mr. Hayes," Rachel said, "is she going to be okay?" I looked at the maple tree. Its leaves were moving in the early morning wind, slow and unhurried, the way things move when they have been rooted long enough to trust that they will hold. "She's going to be better than okay," I said. "It's just going to take her some time to get there." After I hung up, I sat on the back porch for another 20 minutes and finished my coffee. Then I went inside, picked up my phone, and called Claire. I listened to the voicemail. I told her. "I sent you the file." "I got it," she said. "I'll add it to the documentation." "Walter, there's something else I need to tell you. I've been doing some additional background work on Derek, and I found something that I think you need to know about before we decide how to proceed." I set my coffee mug on the kitchen counter. "Tell me," I said. Claire took a short breath. "Derek contacted your bank." The words landed in the quiet kitchen like something dropped from a height. "Say that again," I said. Claire's voice was measured the way it got when she was delivering something that required precision. "I want to be clear about what I mean before you react. He did not access your account. He did not transfer funds or change any information. What he did was call your mortgage servicer and attempt to initiate a conversation about adding a name to the loan." The kitchen was very quiet. Through the back window, the maple tree moved in the morning wind. "He called my bank," I said, "and tried to add his name to my mortgage. He identified himself as an authorized family representative of Walter Hayes," Claire said. He provided your property address, a partial account number, and your date of birth. The representative he spoke with asked for additional verification he couldn't provide and terminated the call. The bank flagged it as an unusual inquiry, but did not contact you because no account changes were made. My jaw tightened until I could feel the pressure in my back teeth. "How did he get the partial account number?" I asked, even though some part of me already knew. "Your mortgage statement," Claire said. "The account number is printed on every statement. If he had access to any piece of mail from your servicer, or if he saw the mortgage documents when the property tax notice led him to start researching the property." She stopped. "Let me fill in the rest. The property tax notice." The envelope that had been opened and resealed with clear tape lined up so precisely that someone who wasn't looking for it would never know. Derek had not just read the address. He had read everything inside the account information, the property details, the financial specifics that gave him enough to attempt what he had attempted. "I want the call log," I said. "Everything the bank has on record about that inquiry. Can I request that as the account holder—" "You can and you should," Claire said. "Call your servicer, directly identify yourself, and ask for a complete record of all third-party contact attempts on your account for the past 90 days. They're required to provide it. When you have it, send it to me immediately." I called the mortgage servicer from the back porch, standing in the morning sun, with the maple tree throwing a long shadow across the yard. The representative I spoke with, a woman named Denise, who had the efficient, pleasant manner of someone who handled difficult calls for a living, confirmed that yes, there had been an inquiry on my account approximately 5 weeks prior. She confirmed the nature of the inquiry. She confirmed that no account changes had been made, and that the call had been terminated when the caller failed secondary verification. She emailed me the complete call log within 20 minutes. I forwarded it to Claire without reading it in full. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be, which told me I was still in the part of this where the mind processes things as logistics rather than feeling them as what they actually are. Claire called back 40 minutes later. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we have." I could hear her moving through documents on her end, the quiet efficiency of someone assembling pieces into a structure. "The call to your bank was made from a number registered to Derek Lawson. The date was 5 weeks before the moving truck arrived. He used your property address, a partial account number that matches what appears on your mortgage statement, and your date of birth information that could be obtained through the tax notice, the Redfin listing, and basic family knowledge." She paused. "Walter using another person's personal identifying information without their consent to attempt to access or modify a financial account is a criminal offense under California Penal Code 530.5. Identity fraud." I sat down on the porch steps. "Combined with the federal mail theft charge from the opened envelope," Claire continued. "We now have 2 criminal statutes, one state, one federal, that flow directly from the same act. He opened your mail, took the information inside, and used that information to attempt financial fraud. The chain is clean and documented. The morning felt different than it had an hour ago. Not heavier exactly, more defined. The way a blueprint feels once all the measurements have been confirmed and there is no more guessing about what anything is." "Claire," I said, "I want you to write a letter." "I've already started," she said. "I've been drafting it since last night. I want to walk you through what I'm including." She read through it with the same precise, unhurried clarity she brought to everything, each item in sequence, each piece of documentation attached, each legal reference cited with its full statutory name so that nothing could be misread or minimized. The Mayflower moving contract signed by Derek Lawson 16 days before Walter left for Germany with the Delano Street address as the delivery destination. The termination notice submitted to the Pasadena landlord bearing a forged signature and sent from an email address Derek had created to impersonate Emily close enough to her real address that the property manager had no reason to question it. The LAPD incident report from the 29th of June documenting unauthorized entry under California Penal Code 602, the lack of any documentation of permission, and the outcome. The camera footage from the Delano Street property time-stamped and archived, showing Derek directing a moving crew through rooms he had never entered, assigning occupancy, and calling a locksmith to change locks he had no legal authority to change. The federal mail inquiry, the opened envelope, the resealed edges, the partial account number extracted and used in a subsequent call to Walter's mortgage servicer. The call log from the bank documenting the identity fraud attempt under California Penal Code 530.5. The legal inquiry Derek had made to a Los Angeles attorney regarding adverse possession, which Claire had obtained through professional channels, establishing that he had researched legal pathways to the property before pursuing direct action. The letter is not a lawsuit, Claire said when she had finished reading the list. It is a notification. It tells Derek and his attorney, if he has won, exactly what documentation exists, exactly which statutes apply, and exactly what options are available to you. It does not demand anything. It simply makes clear what the landscape looks like from where we are standing. She paused. In my experience, a letter like this produces a response within a week. Usually silence. Sometimes an attempt at negotiation. Occasionally an apology. And if it produces nothing, then we discuss next steps, Claire said. But Walter, I have been doing this for 20 years. A man who opened a piece of federal mail, forged his wife's signature on a legal document, and attempted identity fraud against his father-in-law. That man does not want this letter entered into a public court record. Not when he has a career, a credit history, and children whose school community knows his name. I looked out at the maple tree. A squirrel was working its way along the lowest branch, moving with the confident, unhurried efficiency of an animal that knows exactly where it belongs. Send the letter, I said. Already addressed, Claire said. I'll send it this afternoon. After I hung up, I stayed on the porch for a long time. The morning had gone warm, the kind of dry July warmth that settles into Los Angeles by mid-morning and stays until the marine layer comes back in the evening. The maple tree was fully lit now, its leaves catching the light and holding it green and dense and absolutely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 11 days. It had been here before I bought the house. It would be here long after whatever came next was finished. I found that genuinely steadying. 3 days after Claire sent the letter, my doorbell rang at 2:30 in the afternoon. I checked the camera before I opened the door the way I had started doing automatically since late June. Robert Lawson was standing on my front porch with his hands at his sides, and no particular expression on his face, the careful blankness of a man who has rehearsed something difficult and is trying not to lose his nerve before he gets to say it. He was alone. No Brenda. No Derek. I opened the door. I owe you an apology, he said. I know that doesn't cover it, but I'd like to start there if that's all right with you. I stepped back from the doorway. Come in. He walked into my living room slowly, the way people move through a space they have heard described, but never seen, taking in the bookshelf, the kitchen visible through the open doorway, the back windows where the maple tree was catching the afternoon light. He did not sit down until I gestured toward the chair near the window, and even then he sat with his back very straight, his hands on his knees, a man making himself stay present in a room he had no comfortable reason to be in. Derek told us you were moving to Europe, Robert said. Long-term contract, 18 months minimum. He said you'd arranged for Emily to have the house because you didn't want it sitting empty. He said you'd talked it through and everyone understood. He stopped. His jaw worked once like he was chewing something that wouldn't go down. Brenda sold the dining table. The one we bought in 2004, 6 chairs. She sold the whole set because she thought we wouldn't need it where we were going. His voice tightened on the last sentence until it was nearly flat. She cried for 2 hours after she found out the truth. She hasn't spoken to Derek in a week. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that would make Robert feel better, and I was not interested in making him feel better at the expense of what was true. I should have called you, Robert said. Before any of this happened, before we packed a single box, I should have picked up the phone and called you directly. I know that. His hands tightened on his knees. I didn't because Derek asked me not to. He said you were a private person, that you didn't like having arrangements discussed, that he was handling the communication. And He stopped. Breathed. I trusted my son. You're not the only one he asked to trust him, I said. Robert nodded slowly. He looked out the back window at the maple tree for a moment. Then he looked back at me with the expression of a man who has decided to say the thing he came to say, and is going to say it regardless of how it lands. This isn't the first time, he said. I waited. When Derek was 26, there was a situation with a family friend, a man named Garrett who owned a rental property. Derek told Garrett that a cousin needed a place to stay for a few months, nothing formal, a family favor. He told the cousin that Garrett had offered the place rent-free as a gift. He collected money from the cousin for 2 months and told Garrett the cousin was taking care of utilities as thanks. Robert's voice was steady, but his knuckles had gone white against his knees. There was no cousin. Derek kept the money. When Garrett found out, Derek apologized and paid it back and said he'd been under financial pressure and it would never happen again. He stopped. We believed him. I believed him. I told Garrett it was a mistake and asked him not to involve the police, and he agreed because he'd known our family for 20 years. The afternoon light shifted through the back windows, crossing the floor slowly. I'm telling you this, Robert said, because I think you deserve to know the pattern. And because I think I've been protecting him from consequences for a long time, and I'm not going to do it anymore. I should have called you the moment Derek told me you'd arranged this. I didn't, because I have spent 30 years believing my son when I had reason to know better. That stops now. His voice broke slightly on the last word, just slightly, just enough to show what holding it together was costing him. I don't know what you're going to do with what Claire sent. That's your business. But whatever you decide, I'm not going to stand in the way of it. He stood up then, because he had said what he came to say, and staying longer would only make it harder for both of us. At the door, he paused with his hand on the frame. What are you going to do about Emily? He asked. I looked past him at the maple tree visible through the side window, its leaves moving in the dry afternoon heat. That depends on Emily, I said. Robert nodded once. Then he walked down the porch steps and got into his car and drove away. And I stood in the doorway and watched him go. And I thought about a man named Garrett and a cousin who never existed. And 26-year-old Derek Lawson counting money that was not his. And I understood that what had happened on Delano Street had not begun with a property tax notice or a Redfin listing or a moving truck. It had begun much, much earlier than that. Emily called on the morning of the 16th. I knew something had shifted the moment I heard her voice. The Emily who had called me from the motel 3 days after the moving truck, the one whose throat was raw from crying, whose words came in uneven bursts between breaths, was gone. The woman on the phone now was quiet in a different way. Focused. The way a person sounds when they have been sitting with something painful long enough to stop flinching from it and start examining it instead. "Oh," she said, "I need to tell you what I found." "I'm listening." She had spent the past several days going through their financial records. Not because anyone told her to, she had started on her own the night after our conversation about the gray box pulling up bank statements on her laptop while Noah and Lily slept. She had not known exactly what she was looking for. She had found it anyway. "There are transactions I don't remember authorizing," she said. "Transfers from our joint account. Small amounts, 200 here, 300 there, moved into an account I didn't recognize. I called the bank and they told me the secondary account was opened 18 months ago." She paused. "My signature is on the opening documents." My hand tightened around the phone. "Emily," I said carefully, "did you open that account?" "No." Her voice was flat and certain. "I never signed those documents. I've never seen them. But the signature on file—" She stopped, took a breath that was steadier than I expected. "It looks like mine, Dad. It looks exactly like mine. But I didn't sign it." The word settled in the kitchen around me like something physical. Forgery. Derek had not just manipulated information. He had not just managed what each person heard and believed. He had put pen to paper, or whatever the modern equivalent was, and signed his wife's name on documents she had never seen, to accounts she did not know existed, and used those accounts to quietly redirect money that belonged to both of them into something that belonged only to him. "The lease termination notice," I said. "The one that ended your rental in Pasadena. Also my signature," Emily said. "I pulled a copy from the landlord this morning. I've never seen that document before in my life." I pressed my free hand flat against the kitchen counter and held it there. Emily's voice when she continued was not angry. It was something colder and more durable than anger, the tone of someone who has moved past the stage where they need to raise their voice about something and into the stage where they simply intend to deal with it. "Dad," she said. "Can I call Claire?" Something loosened in my chest at those 5 words. Not relief exactly, but something adjacent to it. The particular feeling of watching someone you love decide to take care of themselves. "She's already expecting your call," I said. A pause. "How did you know I'd ask?" "Because you're starting to ask the right questions," I said. "That's more than I could have hoped for 3 weeks ago." Emily was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped slightly, not weak, just careful. Like she was setting something fragile down on a surface and making sure it landed right. "There's one more thing," she said. "I talked to Noah last night." I waited. "He told me Derek said you sold the house because you didn't want to live near us anymore. He said you chose to move away and start a new life." She stopped. "Noah believed him, Dad. He's been believing it for weeks. He told me he didn't want to visit you because he was scared it would make you sad to be reminded of what you gave up." My throat closed around whatever I had been about to say. 9 years old. Noah was 9 years old, and for weeks he had been carrying the belief that his grandfather had chosen to leave, had looked at the family, and decided quietly and deliberately that he wanted to be somewhere else. That visiting would be an intrusion. That love, in this case, was better expressed through absence. Derek had handed that story to a 9-year-old boy and let him carry it alone. The ache that moved through my chest then was the sharpest thing I had felt since the morning the camera alert woke me in Frankfurt. Sharper than the anger, sharper than the grief, because it was not about property or documents or legal statutes. It was about a child sitting in the dark with a story that wasn't true, not knowing he was allowed to pick up the phone. "How did Noah react when you told him the truth?" I asked. Emily's voice, when it came, was tight with the effort of keeping it even. "He cried, Dad. He cried for a long time. And then he asked if he could call you." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Tell him yes," I said. "Tell him any time." Claire confirmed it the next morning in 2 sentences. "The signatures on the account opening documents and the lease termination notice constitute forgery under California Penal Code 470. Emily needs to come in today." I told her Emily was already on her way. Then I got in my truck and drove to Pasadena. I had been thinking about Noah the entire drive down the 110, thinking about a 9-year-old boy sitting with a story that wasn't true, carrying it alone in the way children carry things. Adults hand them without the equipment to question whether the weight is theirs to bear. Derek had not just taken a story and told it to adults who could push back, compare notes, pick up a phone. He had told it to a child. He had handed Noah a version of his grandfather and said, "This is who he is, this is what he chose," and he left. And Noah, because he was 9, and because he loved me, and because children believe the people they are supposed to trust, had believed it. Emily opened the door of the apartment before I reached the top of the steps. She looked tired in the specific way of someone who has not slept well in 3 weeks, but has stopped apologizing for it. She stepped aside without saying anything, and I walked in. Lily came out of the bedroom at a dead run and hit me somewhere around the midsection. With both arms, her face pressed into my jacket, squeezing with the uncomplicated force of a 6-year-old who had not been told to hold back. I put my hand on the back of her head and held on. Noah was standing in the doorway to the bedroom. He was wearing the blue soccer jersey he had owned since last spring, the one with the small tear at the left shoulder that Emily had mended with iron-on tape. He was looking at me with the careful, assessing expression of a child who wants very badly to believe something, but has been hurt enough recently to be afraid of wanting it. I crouched down so we were at the same level. My knees protested the way they had started doing in the last few years, but I stayed down. "You want to see the maple tree?" I asked. Noah looked at his mother. Emily nodded once, just slightly. He looked back at me. Something shifted in his face, not all at once, but the way light changes when a cloud moves gradual and then suddenly complete. "Is it really big?" he asked. 60 years old, I said. "Been there longer than your mom, longer than me, longer than anybody in our family." Noah thought about this with the seriousness that 9-year-olds bring to important questions. Then he crossed the room and put his arms around my neck, and I felt his small shoulders shaking against me. Not crying exactly, but the physical release of something that had been held too tightly for too long, the way a breath comes out after you've been underwater. I held on. I did not rush it. Emily stood near the window with her arms crossed over her chest and her eyes very bright, pressing her lips together hard. Doing the thing she had been doing since she was small, fighting tears by sheer determination, winning about half the time. After a while, Noah pulled back and wiped his face with the back of his hand with the practiced casualness of a boy who did not want anyone to notice he had been crying. "Can we go see it now?" he asked. "Whenever you're ready," I said. Lily, still attached to my jacket, looked up with complete seriousness. "Can I climb it?" "We'll talk about it," I said. Emily laughed, a short, surprised sound, like she had forgotten for a moment that laughing was something she was still allowed to do. It was the best sound I had heard in 3 weeks. On the drive back to Eagle Rock, Noah sat in the back seat of my truck and asked me 17 questions about the maple tree. I answered everyone. Raymond called at 6:58 in the morning, 3 days after I brought Noah and Lily to see the maple tree. Noah had spent 2 hours in the backyard that afternoon, walking around the base of the tree with the focused intensity of a child. conducting a serious inspection. He had measured the trunk with his arms, it took both of them, and then some, and declared that it was, in his professional opinion, the biggest tree he had personally encountered. Lily had asked 4 more times about climbing it. I had told her we would need a ladder and proper supervision, and possibly a helmet, which she had accepted as reasonable terms. It had been a good afternoon. Raymond's voice on the phone was not the voice of a good morning. "Walter," he said, "you need to look at the Eagle Rock Community Facebook group. Right now." I was already on my back porch with coffee. I pulled up the group on my phone with my free hand. Derek had posted a video at 11:43 the previous night. It was 47 seconds long. He had edited it carefully. No footage of Officer Reyes, no footage of the moving crew loading boxes back onto the truck, no footage of Robert standing in the doorway, asking his son to account for himself. What remained was a sequence of images designed to tell a single story: Noah and Lily, standing on the front porch of my house, looking small and confused, boxes stacked around them. Derek's voice narrating over the footage, steady and sorrowful. And at the end, a still image of the front of the house with a caption in large text: "When your own grandfather calls the cops on your kids because he won't share his empty house." My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. The post had 43 comments. Most of them were from people I did not know, Eagle Rock neighbors who had seen the video in their feed, who had typed the things people type when they see a video designed to make them feel a specific way, without giving them enough information to think clearly. A few were people I recognized from the street, from the block party Mrs. Briggs had mentioned, from the coffee shop 2 blocks east. Then I saw the comment from Carol Briggs. It was long. It was specific. It named the date, the time, the sequence of events she had personally witnessed from her kitchen window. It quoted Derek directly. "He relocated overseas permanently. We're taking over the property." And then it explained in the careful, organized prose of a woman who had been a school librarian for 31 years exactly what she had seen Officer Reyes say and do, and what Derek had been unable to produce when asked. It had 47 replies of its own. Below Mrs. Briggs's comment, Robert Lawson had written 4 sentences. "I was there. I am Derek's father." What Mrs. Briggs has described is accurate. Walter Hayes did not agree to any of this. Below Robert's comment, Brenda had written 2. "We were misled by our own son. I am deeply sorry to Walter and to this neighborhood." I sat on the back porch and read all of it twice. Derek's video was not surviving its own comment section. I called Claire at 7:15. "I saw it," she said before I finished explaining. "I've already filed a report with the platform. The video contains identifiable images of minors without documented parental consent. From both guardians, Emily did not consent to her children being filmed and posted publicly in connection with an ongoing legal dispute. Under the platform's own policies and California Family Code provisions regarding minors in legal proceedings, it comes down." "How long?" "Given the documentation I'm attaching to the report, the police incident report, the property records, the forgery case Claire is building for Emily, I'd estimate within the business day." The video was gone by 2:17 in the afternoon. I knew because Raymond texted me a screenshot of the removal notice with a single line underneath it. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. I was in the backyard when the text came through, standing under the maple tree, in the July heat, looking up through the canopy at the sky, visible between the leaves. The tree did not know about Facebook. The tree did not know about any of it. It had been growing in this particular patch of Los Angeles soil since 1965, which meant it had been here through approximately 11 presidential administrations, 4 major earthquakes, and more human drama on this one street than anyone had thought to record. It was still here, I put my phone in my pocket and went inside to start dinner. At 8:42 that evening, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from a number I did not immediately recognize. Then I looked at the name I had saved for it 2 weeks ago. Noah. The text was a single emoji. A tree. I stood at the kitchen counter for a moment, looking at it. Then I typed back a maple leaf, the closest thing available, and set the phone down and finished making dinner. And I felt something settle in my chest that had not been settled in a very long time. Claire called the next morning. "Derek's attorney sent me a letter," she said. Her voice was the careful, precise voice she used when something required full attention. "They're pushing back," she said. Claire read me the letter over the phone while I was standing at the kitchen counter with a second cup of coffee I had not yet touched. Derek's attorney, a man named Hoffman, according to the letterhead Claire had received, had written 4 pages. Claire summarized it in 3 sentences. Derek was asserting that a long-standing pattern of verbal promises and family conduct constituted implied consent for the use of the Delano Street property. He was citing specific instances in which Walter had stated his intention to support Emily and her family financially and emotionally over the years. He was arguing that the events of June 29th should be understood in that context. I set the coffee down. "Claire," I said, "tell me what implied consent means in California real estate law." "It means nothing," she said simply. California Civil Code Section 1624. The statute of frauds requires that any agreement relating to real property be made in writing and signed by the party to be charged. A verbal promise, a pattern of conduct, a family understanding, none of these create a legally enforceable right to occupy or use real property. Hoffman knows this. He's not making a legal argument. He's making a pressure argument. He's hoping you'll find the process exhausting and agree to something to make it stop. "He's going to be disappointed," I said. That's what I thought. I could hear Claire opening documents on her end. "I've been preparing our response since the letter arrived. I want to walk you through what I'm sending back." She laid it out in the same precise, unhurried way she did everything. The response letter would not argue with Hoffman's implied consent theory. It would simply note that the theory had no basis in California law and attach the relevant statute. What the letter would do, Claire said, was remind Derek and his attorney of the complete documentation currently in our possession. She listed it every piece in order: the moving contract signed 16 days before I left the country, the forged lease termination, the police report from June 29th, the bank call log, the opened and resealed envelope, the adverse possession inquiry. The same documentation she had assembled weeks ago. Now it had a destination. "The letter will make clear," Claire said, "that Walter currently possesses sufficient documentation to pursue 3 separate legal actions simultaneously: federal mail theft identity fraud under California Penal Code 530.5 and the forgery under California Penal Code 470 in connection with the Pasadena lease. It will note that Walter has chosen up to this point not to pursue these actions. It will not explain why. It will simply note that the documentation exists, that it is preserved, and that it is available." "Send it, I said. 2 days later, Hoffman's office did not respond. Claire called me on the 29th to let me know. "That's usually what silence means," she said. "I know what it means," I said. I was on the back porch when she called, sitting in the chair I had set up, facing the yard, the maple tree filling most of the view. The July heat had settled in fully by late morning, the dry, specific heat of inland Los Angeles that feels different from humidity, cleaner somehow, like the air has been pressed flat. "Walter," Claire said before she hung up, For what it's worth, in 20 years of practice, I have rarely seen a case where the documentation was this complete and this clean. Derek had months to plan this. He left evidence at every step. The moving contract, the forged signatures, the call to your bank, the opened envelope. She paused. He planned everything except being wrong. I thought about that for a moment. He had planned everything except being wrong. He had researched the property, drafted the floor plan, scheduled. The movers prepared the narrative, positioned each person in their assigned role. And then he had waited, certain that the silence of the people around him would hold long enough for the plan to become a fact. It had not held. Mrs. Briggs had spoken. Robert had spoken. Emily had opened a bank statement on her laptop in a motel room in Pasadena and started asking questions nobody had told her to ask. And I had been awake in Frankfurt at 6 in the morning with a camera system and an attorney on speed dial and 30 years of experience in the business of making sure that structures which are supposed to hold actually do. "Claire," I said. "Thank you." "That's what you pay me for," she said. And then, with the dry warmth she occasionally let through when she thought a moment had earned it. Though I'll admit this one was more satisfying than most. By October, the maple tree had started turning. Not all at once, it never happens all at once with maples. It starts at the edges of the leaves, the furthest points from the branch, the places that feel the change in light first. A thread of yellow here, a wash of amber there, and then, one morning, you look out the back window and the whole tree has shifted into something that was always coming but still manages to surprise you. I was sitting on the back porch with coffee when Raymond pulled up. He came around the side of the house the way he always did. Nobody who knows me well uses the front door, and dropped into the chair beside me without ceremony. I handed him the second cup I had poured, because I knew he was coming. We sat for a while without talking, which is one of the things I value most about Raymond Kowalski. He understands that silence between people who trust each other is not empty. "Emily okay?" he asked eventually. "Getting there," I said. She opened her own bank account in September, started seeing her friends again. She's handling the kids' schedules herself now. I turned the coffee cup in my hands. Every time Derek says the family should, she asks him whether that's what the family needs or what he wants. I paused. Apparently, it stops him cold every time. Raymond made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. "Good for her." "Yeah," I said. "Good for her." We were quiet again. A crow landed on the back fence, looked at us with the specific disdain crows bring to everything, and left. My phone buzzed on the armrest. "Noah." "Grandpa, can I come see the tree this weekend?" I typed back immediately. "Anytime you want, buddy." 3 seconds later, "It's really orange now, right?" "Getting there," I typed. "Come see for yourself." Raymond was watching me from the corner of his eye with the expression he used when he had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. "Go ahead," I said. "You ever regret not telling them about the house from the start?" I thought about it honestly, the way the question deserved. "No." "If you had," Raymond said, "maybe none of this would have happened." "No," I said again. "If I had, it would have happened sooner, and I wouldn't have had 4 months of living in this house the way I wanted to live in it, quietly, on my own terms, without anyone deciding what it should mean or who it should belong to." I looked at the maple tree. The house was never the point. The point was knowing I had built something nobody could take from me. It turned out somebody tried anyway. But they couldn't. Raymond nodded slowly. The back gate opened, and Mrs. Carol Briggs came through it with a covered plate and the purposeful stride of a woman who had decided she was welcome and was correct about that. "Apple pie," she announced, And Walter, the block party committee has put you down for the grill. I hope that's not presumptuous." "It's not," I said. Raymond looked at the pie and then at me. "8 years of saving," he said, "and this is where you end up." "Could be worse," I said. Mrs. Briggs set the pie down on the porch railing and looked out at the maple tree with the expression of someone revisiting an old friend. "It's beautiful this time of year," she said. "It is," I said. It was. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-October. I checked the camera before I answered the way I always do now. Emily was standing on the front porch alone. No Derek, no suitcases, no moving truck idling at the curb. Just my daughter in the blue jacket with the mended left cuff, her hands in her pockets, looking at the front door the way a person looks at something they are not sure they deserve to walk through. I opened the door. She looked past me into the living room at the bookshelf, the kitchen visible beyond the back windows, where the maple tree was blazing orange and amber in the afternoon light. "It's nice, Dad," she said. Her voice was quiet and genuine without the careful management that had been in it for so long. "Thank you," I said. She walked to the kitchen doorway and stopped. The old table was there, the one Margaret and I had bought in 1998, the one that had moved with me through 3 apartments, and finally, after all of it, into this house. Emily reached out and touched the edge of it with her fingertips, the way you touch something that holds more than its weight in memory. "Mom's table," she said. "Yeah." She turned around. Her eyes were bright, but she was holding it together with the particular determination she had inherited from a woman who rarely let things go without a fight. "Dad, I'm sorry." I had thought about what I would say when this moment came. I had considered and discarded several versions. The one that felt truest was the shortest. "I know," I said. Then I stepped to the side and gestured toward the kitchen. "Come in." She walked through the door, not because Derek had told her she had a right to not, because a moving truck was waiting, not because anyone had drawn her name on a floor plan, because the person who owned the house had opened it and asked her to. We sat at the old table with coffee for nearly 2 hours. She did not tell me everything. I did not ask for everything. But we talked the way people talk when the thing that was between them has been named and set down, and they are learning slowly how to be in the same room without it. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and looked out at the maple tree in the fading afternoon light. "Noah is going to lose his mind when he sees it," she said. "He's coming Saturday," I said. "He made me promise we'd rake leaves." Emily smiled, a real one, unhurried, the kind that reaches the eyes. "He's going to jump in the pile the second it's done." "I know," I said. "I'm counting on it." After she drove away, I stood on the front porch for a while in the October air. The light was low and golden, the kind that turns everything the color of something you almost remember. I thought about 8 years of saving, about tuna sandwiches at my desk and automated deposits and the same Ford in the driveway until the odometer said it was time. About a closing in March where a man named Gerald shook my hand and said congratulations, and I sat in my car for 11 minutes afterward, not doing anything at all, just sitting with the fact of it. I thought about Derek, who had planned everything except being wrong. I thought about Emily, who was learning to ask the right questions. I thought about Noah, who was coming on Saturday to jump in a pile of leaves. The maple tree was 60 years old. It had been growing in this particular patch of Los Angeles soil since before I was born, tended by families I would never know, dropping leaves on people whose names were not recorded anywhere. It did not know about property tax notices or Redfin listings or moving trucks or letters from attorneys. It just grew, put down roots, held. A thing planted in the right place and left alone will do that. I went inside, made dinner, Sat at Margaret's table in my own house and ate it quietly, and I felt for the first time in a long time something I had almost forgotten was available to me. Settled. That was the word. I was settled. I spent 8 years building something quietly. No announcements, no celebrations, just patience, discipline, and the belief that what I built belonged to me alone. I was right, but I learned it the hard way. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone listening, and I believe God places these moments in our lives for a reason, it's this: your patience is not permission. Your silence is not agreement. The moment you stop defending what is yours, someone else will start defining it for them. Don't be like me. Don't wait for the moving truck. Don't wait until someone has already assigned your bedroom before you decide your life belongs to you. Speak earlier. Document everything. Know exactly what is yours and be willing to stand behind it. The best family revenge stories are never loud. They don't end with a screaming match or a slammed door. They end with documents, timestamps, and a paper trail so clean it cannot be argued with. That is what real family drama looks like, not dramatic, but slow and undeniable. True family revenge needs no audience. It needs only the truth. And the truth in the end is always enough. Because every story like this begins the same way: someone mistook kindness for weakness and paid for it quietly, completely, and in full. If this story moved, you leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some stories ahead contain fictional elements created purely for reflection and education. If this isn't for you, no judgment. Step away and find what serves you better.